So as most of you are probably aware, we cover a lot of PlayStation news on this channel, most notably PS5 leaks, rumors, and speculation, as we build up to Sony's next console. But a lot of you don't seem to remember what it was like with PlayStation 4. And that's fair. Console launches don't happen all that frequently. But every Friday when we go over the news, we talk about, who's credible, this doesn't sound realistic, this individual might have access to this information, so on and so forth. That's really amplified. But as an example and a bit of a litmus test, let's go over the PlayStation 4 timeline. I mean, we know what happened with PS4, right? So let's look at all those very early rumors and leaks and find out what was and wasn't true. Starting off, the earliest news we have regarding PlayStation 4 dates back to February 2011, where at the time, Sony Computer Entertainment President and CEO Jarryd told a Japanese news website that the company is not even debating the next generation. He was quoted saying, "I think the value of the PS3 will continue to rise. Because of this, a near-future PS4 or next-generation home console is not something that we are even debating right now. That is to say, we are still concentrating fully upon the PS3. Right now, I appeal to you to think of the PS3 and NGP as a new cooperative partnership." Now, remember, NGP stood for Next Generation Portable, which would become PlayStation Vita. We can label this story as, well, not necessarily false, but rather proactive damage control. 2011 is when the PS3 was building momentum and catching up to Xbox 360 in sales. A new portable was on the horizon. It wouldn't make much sense to directly state the next console is coming. However, this wouldn't matter all that much because an investor call in May 2011 revealed that Next Generation was in fact well underway. When investors questioned the high R&D costs being reported, Sony's chief financial officer responded stating, "For the home equipment, the PS3 still has a product life. But this is a platform business, so for the future platform, when we'll be introducing what product, I cannot discuss that, but our development work is already well underway, so the costs are incurred there." This isn't even a rumor, it's true, and for context, PlayStation 4 development began internally in 2008 after a post-mortem analysis of the PS3 took place. This is when Mark Cerny approached multiple Sony executives to see if he could be the lead system architect after learning an x86-based architecture could be embraced in a home console. In fact, it's very typical that after a year or two for the console manufacturer to already start the early phase of their next hardware. By July 2011, Digitimes was reporting that a Taiwan-based component maker was expecting PS4 production to begin later that year, with a launch window sometime in 2012. They also noted that the PS4 will offer movement-based control like Kinect for Xbox 360. While PS4 did not launch until holiday 2013, it did launch with a camera peripheral like Kinect. This is perhaps one of those cases where the information is so early that the whole subject to change argument really holds here. The console still has plenty of time to move around and change in terms of release window and intended peripherals, which we know the camera ended up being more of an afterthought. That is until we learned it was integral for PSVR, where development of that was as early as 2010 with prototype Move controllers. In September 2011, a Bitmob report came out citing a source that was present at a high-level meeting at Sony. They claimed simply PlayStation 4 in 18 months. The report noted that it wasn't sure if that meant an announcement in 18 months or the launch, but looking back, 18 months after September 2011 would put it very close to the initial PS4 reveal we got in February 2013. It seems this source was good. A month later, October 2011, Develop Online reported PS4 games were entering a preliminary stage with Sony's internal studios, and that they could begin development immediately, pending any required approval from Sony. This, even back then, could have easily been labeled as true. There needs to be, at minimum, a 2-year lead from a platform launch to start developing this kind of software. So, for the most part, this was an unsurprising but accurate report. This also lines up with a rumor in November that major third-party studios were now receiving not dev kits, but target boxes with off-the-shelf PC parts for Microsoft's next-generation console. Developers need time to make games, so this is true. However, this same rumor claimed one major Sony-owned studio has now ceased all PlayStation 3 development for next-gen. This could be Guerrilla Games or Sucker Punch, as both developers shipped their final PS3 games in 2011, except Sucker Punch was working on extra content for Infamous 2 at the time, which lines up Guerrilla nicely for a rumor just a few weeks later claiming a new Killzone was in production. While PS4 isn't named as the platform, Killzone Shadowfall ended up being a PS4 launch title. Sucker Punch followed shortly after with Infamous Second Son in early 2014. Right before November closed, SCEE President and CEO Jim Ryan told Eurogamer TV that, "I think we would consider it undesirable to be significantly later than the competition," in reference to next-generation platforms. Indeed, the company learned its lesson with PS3, and PS4 launched a week away from Microsoft's Xbox One. December 2011 saw a pastebin leak that is actually pretty eye-opening. The leak claims a lot of developers have received PS4 and next Xbox development kits, and that they are codenamed Orbis and Durango respectively. Both consoles would have a Blu-ray drive and updated motion control systems. The Xbox would have an 8-core 64-bit processor rated at 1.2 teraflops, with PS4 featuring a 4-core 32-bit processor. The next Xbox would support DirectX 11, and PS4 will use OpenGL. Xbox would have 4 GB of RAM, PS4 will have 2 GB. PS4 will have no hard drive, while Xbox ships with a 500 GB hard drive with 8 GB of flash memory. The next Xbox will also have a 24/7 connectivity system with cloud-based connectivity in 2015 to 2016. The leaker claims some developers like EA are extremely displeased with the low PS4 specs. This one is fascinating because it paints a broad picture of how we can look at and interpret leaks. A lot of this is wrong, but also correct. Knowing the codenames early and Xbox's planned requirement for internet connectivity gives good insight that some of the information is credible. Information this early almost always has to come from someplace like Pastebin or 4chan, as the leaker even notes, "I tried to leak them to Engadget, but they weren't going to print it without independent confirmation, and no one is going to confirm this because they like their jobs." It's early enough for a lot to change, but good enough that some crucial points were still correct. For PS4, we know that Mark Cerny stated one of the key principles of PS4 development was having frank and open conversation with developers, to ask them what they wanted and build a platform around their wants and desires. The only real story we have here regarding something like this is Gearbox's Randy Pitchford telling Sony that if they don't go with 8 GB of RAM, they'd be dead. But this was when the platform allegedly had 4 GB, so if PS4 was initially this poor of a machine, it stands to reason that feedback is what upped performance dramatically before the RAM story broke out. Which, in the timeline here, the decision to up the RAM from 4 to 8 was a last-minute decision from Sony. It's one of the few things that can actually be changed that close to launch. Starting off 2012, there was a rumor that Sony would be unveiling PS4 during E3 2012, though this rumor was not easily believed, and rightfully so, as it turned out to be wrong. But later in January is where rumors started to kick off more for the next Xbox. Kotaku reported that Microsoft's next machine would play Blu-rays, come with a new Kinect, and that it might not play used games. This all being 100% accurate for something as early as January 2012. February saw a report that Sony would be partnering with AMD for the CPU and GPU instead of their previous cell processor RSX efforts on the PS3, where Sony worked with IBM, Toshiba, and Nvidia. Kotaku also did their due diligence and ran with a similar story. This early rumor also turned out to be true. March is when we had a really big break, with Kotaku publishing a piece that covers Orbis rumors from multiple sources. They state the codename is in fact Orbis, and that it's scheduled for a holiday 2013 release. It won't be backwards compatible with PS3 games, and it will lock new games to a PSN account as an anti-used game measure. New games can be bought or downloaded, and the current specs are apparently much higher than that of the Pastebin post from last year. So far, the codename, release, and no backwards compatibility is correct, but it's the used games policy that stirs up a lot of conversation back then. Durango is rumored to have an online connectivity requirement, whereas Orbis would require a one-time authentication that sticks that disc to your name. While you could label this false because PS4 did not end up having this, it appears that it was definitely something on the table between both Sony and Microsoft, with both companies handling it differently. In April, IGN posted a rumor regarding PS4's targeted performance, using off-the-shelf parts as a loose comparison to give perspective on what PS4 might be like, while still noting that the final silicon will be more customized and thus skewed towards better performance than what is currently being reported. With multiple sites chiming in, the benchmarks with said parts puts PS4 as a console running games at mostly 1080p, 30 frames per second. And this, for the most part, seemed to be accurate info, as PS4 early on was running a number of games at a native 1080p, 30 frames per second, with some games opting to go 900p. In July, Sony announced that they acquired Gaikai, a game streaming company that was still in its infancy. While there were no rumors with sources, the general consensus and discussion around that acquisition is that Sony would be incorporating the service into PS4, potentially to play PS3 games over the internet, to which this was also true. By November 2012, a new rumor surfaced of a more powerful dev kit coming out, this one featuring an AMD A0 APU with 8GB to 16GB of RAM and 256GB of storage. This will go in line with another rumor in January, first reported by CVG. They had sources telling them Sony would be retiring the DualShock with PS4. They noted the controller would feature an LED touchscreen and biometric sensors on the grips. Just days later, Kotaku followed up with a story citing multiple sources, but also leaked documentation of the Orbis kit that's available to developers. They note the current dev kit can use 6-axis, DualShock 3, but also a new controller labeled Orbis Development Tool. They claim this controller will have a touchpad rather than an actual screen, much like the Vita's touchpad. They also apparently have a share button on the controller, which at the time no one knew exactly what that meant. They also have a spec sheet for the development kit, which at this point is considered the most recent, with system memory at 8GB. The CPU and GPU are now much closer to what would be retail hardware, and there's 4 USB 3.0 ports, 2 Ethernet, and a 160GB hard drive. Those last 3 of which are specifically the way they are for development purposes. The documentation also suggests account logins can now be done at the same time on one system, with accounts assigned to controllers. This all of which completely accurate as it was leaked documentation about the development kit. By the end of the month, Sony finally revealed press invites were sent out for a media event that would be held on the 20th of February. However, just before the event, a picture of the prototype controller and dev kit leaked online. The controller showed the new light bar, touchpad, and share button that was previously reported. The picture was genuine. By the 20th, the event was finally here and Sony revealed the PlayStation 4, and while there were still some unanswered questions, namely what the box even looked like, most of the rumors and speculation simmered down now that the cat was out of the bag. From here, a lot of pressure was put towards whether Sony would in fact have a policy against used games. Eurogamer had asked Sony Worldwide Studios head Shuhei Yoshida if PS4 would block used games, and Shuhei responded with, "Do you want us to do that?" And after an elaboration from Eurogamer about passing on what you own, Shuhei said, "Yes, that's the general expectation by consumers. They purchase physical form, they want to use it everywhere, right? So that's my expectation." Eurogamer then asked, "So if someone wants to sell a PS4 game, you won't stop them from reselling it?" Shuhei then talked to a PR advisor and then gave the statement that used games can play on PS4. How is that? This interaction didn't seem to put anything to rest, as it came off as initially puzzling and open-ended, that Sony would instead allow used games, but at an additional fee. This was spurred on even more from a patent the previous month that demonstrated a tag ID system for game discs. By May, Microsoft unveiled the Xbox One, to which it saw a lot of intense criticism for not only the messaging, but also the confirmation afterwards that Xbox One will have a policy on used games and also require a 24/7 internet connection. With this announcement out, Jeff Keighley followed up a few days later stating that he had heard the same thing about Sony, that they would also have something in place. It wouldn't take long after this for the internet to fire back at Sony with a targeted campaign pleading that the PS4 not impose any restrictions on used games or require an internet connection. The hashtag PS4NoDRM was all over Twitter, with fans asking Sony employees not to move forward with any policies. Sony remained quiet, making the tension even greater. Once E3 2013 came, Sony finally unveiled the final hardware design of the PlayStation 4. This is one element of the system that was held in good secrecy and never leaked prior. But towards the end of the show, Sony finally made a public statement that PS4 will not feature any policies against used games or require an internet connection. That, coupled with the low price at the end, was one of Sony's shining moments with the platform, and one that many will always remember. After the show, Sony admitted that instead of making a public statement right away, they felt it would be better to hold it for their E3 show, even making a short video afterwards and directly mocking the Xbox One. It's still unclear exactly what went on behind the scenes when it came to used games. While you can easily label all of these rumors as false because PS4 did in turn not block used games, it still seems odd that there were this many rumors regarding it from previously credible sites and sources. Whether this was a mix-up with the Microsoft stuff, or Sony's plans were shelved internally, or they saw the Microsoft backlash and changed it last minute, remains to be seen. At the time, Sony said the hashtag PS4NoDRM only made them change the E3 show and not their actual decision on the subject, suggesting PS4 was always going to play used games, but it also stands to reason the company wouldn't admit any actual plans or R&D relating to it. From there, most rumors and speculation divulged to direct comparisons against Microsoft or smaller details like UI features of the PS4 itself. Besides that, it was all hands on deck as most information about the PlayStation 4 was now available to the public. So with all that information out of the way, what have we really learned here? It's important to note two very different timelines. It may seem like it was recent, but not really. We have a lot more insiders nowadays that are claiming things that may or may not be true about PlayStation 5. And they were a thing back then, but it's just so much harder to trace those original posts, those original accounts. That's why a lot of this was major sites that are still up and they still have their articles running because, well, they're major sites and they often do their due diligence with credible sources, and that's why a lot of the information ended up being true. But there's two very important themes to note here, I think. The first one being that if you were to match up these timelines before an official reveal, we know more about PS5 than we do about PS4, for example. And that's just because Sony's handing out the information in a different manner. Instead of waiting for a reveal event, they've already told us actually a lot about PlayStation 5 in the form of those 2 articles. They are talking about it, they're just not doing actual things that our eyes can see, right? We can't see technical demos, the controller, the box. No developers are talking about it. That's the really important thing to note here. Sony's just doing it in a different manner. The other one being the pastebin post, right? A lot of that information was actually correct, and that was, what, 2 years out? That's what's so important about places like Pastebin, even Reddit Today, 4chan. These are places that people can go to anonymously. So despite the fact that a lot of it now, because there's so much more people on the internet, so many more people are playing games and can easily post a bunch of nonsense that sounds real on the surface, but also sounds not real. The thing is, posting anonymously is job security. That post actually explained it quite well. They explained how they had the information. They explained that nobody wanted to run with the story because it couldn't be verified, and it couldn't be verified because nobody wants to lose their job. That's what's so interesting about anonymous places. They are often more credible and more reliable than insiders that claim to have secondhand information that aren't actually from the specific employer, the specific company that we're trying to look at here and figure out what they're up to. So that's very important to note when we look at PlayStation 5 moving forward. But anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it. As I mentioned at the start of the video, we do a lot of PlayStation news on this channel. Every Friday we go over the week of PS news, so if you haven't yet, you should subscribe for the best PlayStation news, reviews, and updates that are here on YouTube. And you can follow me on Twitter at MysticRyan, which you totally should. And that is it. I will see you all in my next video. You take it easy.